Imagine this. You're sitting on a worn patch of earth near the Sea of Galilee. It's early morning, and the sky is still a soft gray blue, the kind that makes you want to stay wrapped in your blanket just a little longer. The breeze is gentle, carrying that faint, salty smell from the water. Somewhere nearby, a rooster is trying its best to be important, but no one is paying it much attention. You're not rich, not poor either. You're just surviving. That kind of quiet existence where each day looks a little like the one before it. You mend nets, you scrub your sandals, you try not to step in donkey mess. Maybe once a week you get something with spice in it. Most of the time, it's barley bread again. The lake is calm this morning, and your hands smell like fish. You don't even notice it anymore. That's just life. Then you see him, this man walking along the shore. He's not from around here, you'd know. Small towns are like that. Strangers stand out the way a fresh fig stands out in a basket of dried ones. He walks up to Simon and Andrew, two brothers you know well enough. Simon's the loud one. Andrew's quieter, always kind of watching. They're mending nets with fingers so calloused you'd think they were made of rope. And this man, he just says it right there in the open. Come, follow me. No 10-minute introduction, no handshake, just that. And here's the strange part. They go. They actually put down their nets. They leave the fish, the tools, everything. Simon, who never shuts up, is now quiet. He just looks at the man once, then at Andrew, and they both nod, as if some invisible string got tugged and that was all it took. You don't even know what they're following him for. They don't either, but they do it anyway. You blink, and now he's walking up the shoreline again. Same slow, steady pace. He sees two more brothers, James and John. They're in a boat with their dad, Zebedee. The old man's grumbling about knots, and John is trying not to roll his eyes. James is already halfway overboard before Jesus even finishes the sentence. You want to say, hey, maybe think this through? But no one does, because somehow deep down everyone knows. This man isn't asking for help with fishing, he's asking for lives. You're not by the sea anymore. It's quieter now. Not the kind of quiet that feels peaceful. The kind that sinks into your chest and doesn't let go. The kind that hangs in doorways and clings to shared glances between men who've seen too much and spoken too little. You're in Jerusalem, tucked away in an upstairs room that creaks with every movement. It smells like old wood, oil lamps, and the nervous sweat of people who know they're being watched. The 12, or rather the 11 now, are here. Not all the time. They come and go like ghosts, too afraid to settle. Peter sits by the window sometimes, staring into the street like he's waiting for someone to knock or arrest him. Thomas keeps pacing, muttering things under his breath. John sits silently in the corner, his face unreadable, like he's somewhere else entirely. Jesus is gone. You were there. Maybe not at the front, maybe not close enough to see the nails, but close enough to hear the crowd and the weeping and that horrible silence that came when he breathed his last. And then, something impossible. He came back. You don't talk about that much, not because it didn't happen, but because you still don't know how to say it out loud without your voice shaking. One moment he was dead, cold, lifeless, sealed away. And then he was speaking your name, breaking bread, showing you scars you didn't want to believe were real. But they were. He was real, alive, different somehow, but still him. And now he's gone again. This time not through death, but through something stranger. Ascending, rising into the sky until he was just a speck and then nothing at all. He told them to wait, told them power would come, but he didn't say what it would feel like to wait with this much fear. You wouldn't last a day in this room if it weren't for the whispers of hope. The shared stories, the memory of his voice, the way he looked at you like he saw everything and loved you still. And so they wait. One night, the air shifts. A sound like wind, but nothing's moving. Flames, yes, actual flames, appear above their heads, but no one burns. Instead, there's this sudden surge of something, bigger, stronger, like courage waking up inside your bones. They begin to speak. Languages they've never learned. Words that leap over borders and barriers. They run into the streets, laughing, shouting, filled with something that feels like fire and joy and clarity all at once. That was the moment everything changed. They stopped hiding. They started speaking. And that's when the real danger began. Because if following Jesus while he was alive was hard, following him after his death, after his resurrection, was something else entirely. Now the apostles will scatter. Some will go north, others east, far beyond familiar towns and into lands where no one speaks their language. Some will write letters, some will vanish into stories and rumor. And almost all of them will die far from home. Not from age or illness, but because they wouldn't stop talking about him. They preached to kings, to prisoners, to villagers who had never heard his name. They healed, they wept. They walked miles with sandals that fell apart long before they did. And slowly, one by one, they gave everything they had. This is where that story begins. The story of how they lived and how they died. Not just as men, but as apostles. The strange thing is, Peter never planned to lead anything. You remember him, don't you? Back by the sea. Loud, sunburned, always the first to speak, and often the first to regret it. The man was a walking contradiction. Bold as a lion, nervous as a bird, faithful enough to step out of a boat in a storm, and scared enough to sink halfway through. He loved Jesus. That was never in doubt. But he also denied him 3 times. Swore he didn't even know the man. It happened the night of the trial, around a courtyard fire. Peter's voice cracked when a servant girl pointed him out. "Weren't you with him?" she asked. And Peter, who had once promised to die for Jesus, said, "No." 3 times he said it, and then the rooster crowed. You probably wouldn't have forgiven yourself. Most people wouldn't, but Jesus did. After the resurrection, Peter found him again, by a fire of all things. Jesus didn't yell, didn't lecture, just asked a simple question, 3 times. "Do you love me?" Peter said yes, each time louder than the last. And Jesus smiled and said, "Then feed my sheep." That's how Peter became a shepherd. Now you're with him in Jerusalem again. The city's buzzing with tension. Roman guards patrol the streets. The temple is crowded. Whispers follow you wherever you go. But Peter stands up anyway. He starts preaching, not in secret, not behind locked doors, in the streets. He talks about Jesus, about what they saw, what they heard, what they touched with their own hands. He tells the crowd they killed the Son of God, and then tells them God forgave them anyway. You hold your breath waiting for a sword or a stone. Instead, people listen. Hundreds, then thousands. They're baptized right there in the streets, still dripping wet and laughing like it's the first time they've ever felt clean. But not everyone's happy. The temple leaders drag Peter in. They threaten him. "Stop talking about Jesus," they say. "We mean it." Peter just shrugs. "You decide for yourselves if we should obey God or you. But we can't stay quiet." And they don't. He's arrested again. And again. Once he's even thrown in jail, and an angel shows up in the middle of the night and just opens the door. No lightning, no big speech, just, "Come on, get up." Like it's the most normal thing in the world. Peter walks right out and goes straight back to preaching, like a man who's finally stopped running from who he is. Years pass. The church grows. The apostles spread out, some east, some south, some to places with names you can't pronounce. Peter heads west toward Rome, the center of power, the lion's den. He writes letters, encourages the scattered believers, reminds them to love, to serve, to endure. You can feel the weariness in his words, and the fire too. The man who once sank in a storm is now a rock others lean on. But Rome isn't safe, not with Nero in charge. That man's temper burns hotter than the city itself, and when Rome catches fire, literal fire, Nero blames the Christians, says they started it, says they deserve what's coming. And what's coming isn't mercy. Christians are dragged into arenas, thrown to lions, set on fire as torches, hung on crosses. The empire is bleeding fear into the streets. Peter is caught, and here's where the story takes its final turn. They tell him he's going to be crucified, just like his Lord. But Peter shakes his head. Not like him, he says. I'm not worthy. He asks to be crucified upside down, and they do it. You want to look away, but you can't. The man who once said, I don't know him, now dies because he won't stop saying his name. Upside down. Some say it happened on Vatican Hill, just outside the city, where the sky is red in the evening, and the wind carries the sound of iron striking wood. You stand there, watching from a distance, heart heavy. But something strange stirs in you. Not sorrow, not entirely. It's honor. Because this man, this fisherman who once sank in a lake and cried in a courtyard, died with courage in his chest and his Savior's name on his lips. And somehow, that matters more than how it ended. You stay there a while after it's over. The crowd thins, the dust settles. But in your mind, you still see him. Peter, the rock, the loud one, the doubter, the bold believer, hanging upside down under a Roman sky, whispering the name of the man who changed everything. And beside you, standing in the shadow of that terrible moment, is his brother. Andrew doesn't say much. He never really did. Even now, watching the crowds disappear into the Roman evening, he only lowers his head and closes his eyes. He was there at the beginning, you remember, long before Peter became the face of it all. Andrew had always walked a step behind, never needing to be the voice, just wanting to be close to the truth. He doesn't cry, not outwardly. But when he finally turns and walks away from the hill where Peter died, you can see it in the way his shoulders sink. The kind of grief that doesn't shout, it just settles into your bones like evening mist. He doesn't stop walking, doesn't go back home. That was never part of the plan. And this is where his story continues. You follow him across the sea, eastward. The hills turn rocky. The cities feel unfamiliar. People here speak in sharp syllables and raise their eyebrows when he mentions Jesus. But Andrew doesn't falter. He speaks plainly, quietly. And still, people listen. Not crowds, not always, but enough. A mother with a sick child, a fisherman with tired hands, a merchant who's lost more than money. They listen because Andrew doesn't preach like a teacher. He talks like someone who knows, and he does, about watching his master pray so quietly it made the world feel still. And he tells them, always, that death didn't win, that love came back. But not everyone is moved. You reach a city in Greece, maybe Patras, the name doesn't matter. What matters is the tension. You feel it in the streets, in the way the guards watch too closely, in the way people stop talking when you walk by. The Roman officials have heard about him, about the crowds, about the strange Galilean preaching about one God, one Lord, one cross. They summon Andrew. This is your chance, they say. Deny him, and we let you go. Just a few words, say he was a teacher, a prophet, a man, nothing more. But Andrew doesn't flinch. His voice is soft, but steady. I will not deny the one who gave everything for me. They choose a cross, but not the same as Peter's, and not the same as Jesus's. This one is X-shaped, two beams crossing in the middle like a broken doorway. And that's what they bind him to. Not nail, but tie. So it takes longer, so he suffers slower. You'd look away if you could, but Andrew, he keeps speaking. He talks the whole time, not with anger, not with fear, but with joy. He calls out blessings over the people, tells them not to weep. Says he's going home, says he sees the king waiting for him, says the cross isn't a punishment, it's an invitation. 2 days he hangs there, 2 days of wind and dust and pain, and then quiet. But somehow, it doesn't feel like an ending. It feels like a seed being planted. The cross still stands when you leave, empty now, weathered, but in the minds of those who heard him, that cross will never be forgotten, because Andrew wasn't just Peter's brother. He was the first to follow, and the last to walk away. The cross is still standing when you leave, empty now, just 2 rough beams bound together like they're still holding on to something invisible. The wind catches the edge of your robe as you walk. The road is long, and you walk it alone for a while. But then, not far off, you see a figure. He's sitting beneath a tree, sketching something into the dirt with the end of a stick. You recognize the furrow in his brow before he even looks up. He's always thinking, always questioning, always somewhere between doubt and wonder. It's Thomas. You remember the first time he spoke up after Jesus died. The others were saying he was alive again, that they'd seen him, touched him, eaten with him. And Thomas, honest as ever, just shook his head. Unless I see the nail marks in his hands, unless I put my finger where the nails were, I won't believe it. He wasn't being difficult. He just couldn't lie to himself. You sit beside him. He doesn't look surprised to see you. He rarely does. Instead, he says something like, "Did you know that cross they tied Andrew to was shaped like a doorway?" You nod. Thomas nods too, like that confirms something in his mind. Then he stands, brushes off his hands, and starts walking, and you follow. He doesn't talk much about Jerusalem anymore. Those days feel far away now. He talks about roads, about the ones not yet traveled, the ones no one else wanted to take. You walk with him eastward, further than you thought possible, past the familiar dust of Judea, past the markets of Syria, past the highlands of Persia. You lose count of the days, of the villages, of the languages, but not of the faces. They listen to him, because Thomas doesn't speak like someone who has it all figured out. He speaks like someone who wrestled with truth, doubted it, touched it, and stayed anyway. And that kind of honesty, it breaks through walls. In India, people still tell stories about him, how he built churches with his bare hands, how he baptized strangers in rivers that ran red with clay, how he healed with prayers spoken in a language no one had taught him. They called him Mar Thoma, St. Thomas. But even here, far from home, there are whispers. Some don't like what he says. A few fear it. And others, well, others are tired of gods who bleed and die and rise again. One morning, Thomas goes to pray. It's early, the kind of quiet where the air still feels like night. And that's when they come. The details are hazy. Some say it was soldiers, others say local priests, but it was a spear. That much is agreed on. A long, sharp one. They struck him through the side, right where Jesus had been pierced. You almost laugh at the bitter symmetry of it, but it's not funny. It's holy. Thomas doesn't cry out. He just sinks to the ground slowly, like a man returning to earth one last time. You kneel beside him. He's breathing hard. His hand finds yours. And then, through dry lips, he whispers something. Not why, not how, just one word. Believe. And then he's gone. You bury him beneath a tree with blossoms the color of old wine. The people come. They light lamps. They sing in a tongue you still don't understand, but you recognize the meaning. They believed him. Even the doubter. Because in the end, Thomas didn't stay where it was safe. He went the furthest and gave everything he had. You don't leave India right away. Not because the road back is long, though it is, but because something about Thomas lingers. The dust seems quieter here, the stars a little closer. You think of his last word, believe, and somehow that word feels heavier now, fuller. But eventually you begin to walk again. The road west hums beneath your sandals. The hills roll like waves, and you follow them until the sky changes color and the language shifts. And that's when you see him, Philip. He's standing beneath an olive tree, squinting into the horizon like he's trying to measure the distance between here and heaven. Always calculating, always thinking. He's the one who asked Jesus, "Where will we get enough bread to feed all these people?" As if the Son of God might have forgotten to pack lunch. You smile when you remember that. Philip turns when he hears you approach. He doesn't speak right away, just nods like he's been expecting you, or maybe like he's been expecting someone. You sit beneath the tree and listen, as he pulls apart a piece of bread, hands you half, and talks softly about things you almost forgot to remember. The time he brought Nathanael to Jesus, the day Jesus said, "Anyone who has seen me has seen the Father," and Philip had blinked, stunned, unsure how something so infinite could be standing right in front of him. You travel with him for a while, through Samaria, Syria, maybe Phrygia. The borders blur when you're walking for something bigger than geography. Philip always stops for the ones no one else sees. The woman carrying water alone. The man sitting outside the city gate with nothing in his bowl but wind. The boy with sandals too small and questions too big. He answers every one, not because he knows everything, but because he's not afraid of the asking. In one town, maybe Hierapolis, maybe another with a name that slipped away, the crowd gathers, not a large one, not the kind Peter drew, but hungry, curious, and a little afraid. He tells them stories, not the polished kind, the real ones. Like how he was confused half the time Jesus spoke, how he thought they were building a kingdom with walls, and instead found out they were building something invisible and eternal. The stories soften people. You can see it in their faces. But it also stirs up trouble. There are always those who feel threatened by light, especially when it enters rooms they've spent years trying to keep dark. He's arrested, and this time, he's not alone. His daughters are with him, followers too, preachers in their own right. The authorities try to shame him through them, try to humiliate him. But Philip doesn't waver. He doesn't beg. He prays. They bring him to a tree, not a cross this time. They say he was tied to it, not nailed, bound tightly as the crowd looked on. And even there, with blood drying on his hands and dust in his mouth, he asks just one thing. Not for escape, not for revenge, but for forgiveness. They say he died with his head tilted to the side, as if listening to something the rest of the world couldn't hear. Maybe he was. You stay until the branches sway low and the crowd fades. There's no thunder, no curtain torn in two, just the rustle of wind through olive leaves. But it's enough. Because Philip never needed a sign in the sky. He just needed a reason to believe. And he found it. The path takes you further east again, back through dusty villages where the walls lean slightly inward, as if they're tired of holding themselves up. You're used to silence on the road now. Long stretches of walking where your thoughts echo louder than your footsteps. And that's when you spot him, sitting on a low stone wall beneath a fig tree, Bartholomew. Some called him Nathanael. Others just called him Quiet. But you remember his first moment, the one that still makes you smile. Back when Philip ran to him, bursting with excitement. "We've found the one, Jesus of Nazareth." And Bartholomew raised an eyebrow. Can anything good come from Nazareth? Not cruelly, just honestly. Because Nazareth wasn't known for much. It was the kind of place people didn't bother writing songs about. But then Jesus saw him, and before Bartholomew said a word, Jesus said, "Now here's a man without deceit." It shook him. Not because it was flattery, but because it was true. And he knew no one else could have known it. That's when he followed. He sits beside you now, under the fig tree again, years later, as if circling back to where it all began. He hasn't changed much. He still doesn't talk unless he has something worth saying. But when he does speak, it settles into your bones like truth poured warm into clay. You walk with him for weeks, maybe months. No one tracks these journeys precisely. He speaks to strangers with gentleness. He answers accusations with patience. And he never forgets that question he once asked. Can anything good come out of Nazareth? It's why he speaks so carefully now, because he knows the answer. He travels far, past familiar languages, past safe places. Armenia, perhaps, or maybe India again. Some say he followed Thomas's trail east, building on the work his friend left behind. But the further he goes, the colder the welcome. He's preaching in a region thick with temples and kings who see themselves as gods. And when he speaks of Jesus, a carpenter, a crucified man from a nowhere town, they don't hear hope. They hear insult. They take it personally. One day, he's taken, dragged not to a prison, not even to a courtroom, just a square, hot and loud, surrounded by soldiers who don't know his name and don't care. There are no formalities, no questions. They begin to flay him, slowly, methodically, peeling the skin from his body like parchment from a scroll. You wish this part weren't true, but it is. And through it, through a pain you can't imagine, he doesn't curse. He doesn't plead. He just closes his eyes and prays the name that changed everything. Jesus. They say he was still speaking it when he died. Some stories say he was beheaded afterward. Others say he bled out at the foot of a temple he refused to worship in. The facts blur, but the truth, that's clear. The man who once doubted Nazareth found something so good, so true, so divine, that he gave every layer of himself to it, even his skin. And you're left there, standing in the heat, stunned not by the brutality, but by the peace on his face, a peace that only comes when you've finally stopped questioning and started living the answer. It's late afternoon now. The air is thicker, the light beginning to slant sideways. Everything around you feels a little golden, a little tired. Like the day itself is exhaling. You pass a row of crumbling houses, their shutters half open, the smell of bread baking in clay ovens slipping through the cracks. And then you hear it, the scratching of a stylus on parchment. Matthew, he's hunched over a scroll at a low table, brow furrowed, fingers smudged with ink. You sit down across from him without a word. He doesn't look up. He's mid-thought, probably has been all morning. He always was a recorder of things. You remember when he was still Levi, the tax booth, the uncomfortable silence, the way people avoided him on purpose. Not because they didn't know him, but because they did. He worked for Rome, collected taxes from his own people, and maybe skimmed a little off the top. Everyone knew it. No one said it out loud. Except Jesus. 2 words. Follow me. And somehow, that was all it took. You think about that often, about how some people had to be called twice, or wrestled with, or chased down. But Matthew, he just got up. Left the coins, left the table, left everything. And then he threw a party, a dinner where tax collectors and so-called sinners reclined next to Jesus while the Pharisees looked on, scandalized. You were there. You remember the laughter, the shock, the deep joy on Matthew's face, like someone had finally told him he belonged. Years later, here he is, still writing. Not ledgers this time. A gospel. He's careful with his words, tracing each one like it might be etched in stone. He wants to get it right, to show his people that Jesus wasn't the end of the story, he was the fulfillment of it. You ask him why he started writing. He finally looks up and says, "Because too many people only saw the taxes. I want them to see the truth." His voice is quiet, not ashamed, not proud, just settled. Matthew travels too, though less than the others. Ethiopia, perhaps, or Persia. Different sources say different things, but one thread ties them all together. He never stopped preaching, never stopped writing. He taught with the heart of a man who knew what it was to be unwanted and what it meant to be chosen anyway. And eventually, that message got him noticed. Not by crowds this time, by rulers. By priests with gold rings and short tempers, by kings who didn't like the idea of another kingdom, one that couldn't be bought, taxed, or ruled. He's arrested. They say he was stabbed or possibly burned alive. The records are hazy, the kind written in whispers instead of ink. But those final pages, those are clear. He died proclaiming the kingdom of heaven. Not a palace, not a system, but a person. Jesus. And somehow it's fitting. The man who once counted coins died counting souls. And when the end came, it wasn't at a table full of debt, but at a table of grace. You stay a moment longer. The scroll still lies on the table, his last words half finished, the ink not yet dry, and you know someone else will finish the writing. But no one will forget who started it.
You leave the scroll behind, though part of you wants to carry it, as if words that sacred might soften the road ahead. But Matthew's story is finished, at least in ink. And there's another voice calling now, louder, rougher, the kind that cracks through silence like thunder on dry stone. James, the son of Zebedee, brother of John. One half of the pair Jesus once nicknamed Boanerges, sons of thunder. And thunder, well, that's exactly what James brought with him wherever he went. You remember his temper. Not mean, just intense. Like someone who'd been burning at a low boil his whole life and didn't know how to simmer down. The kind of man who spoke first and prayed about it later. Once, when a Samaritan village didn't welcome Jesus, James turned to him and asked, dead serious, "Lord, do you want us to call down fire from heaven?" Jesus just gave him a look. And James, in his own way, learned. He was in the innermost circle, one of the three who saw things the others didn't. He watched Jesus raise a dead girl, stood trembling on the mountaintop when Christ's face shone like lightning, sat closer than most in Gethsemane, when the sky felt heavy and the ground itself seemed to breathe with sorrow. James saw everything. But after the resurrection, after the fire of Pentecost lit up the sky, James didn't leave Jerusalem right away. He stayed, preached boldly, healed with his hands, spoke with a voice that sounded like stone breaking open. And the authorities noticed. Herod Agrippa had come to power, a man who understood how to please the crowd, especially the kind of crowd that liked things neat and quiet and religious. Christians were anything but. So Herod looked around, found the loudest disciple he could, and pointed. James. There was no trial, no crowd gathered for this one, just a soldier, a sword, and an early morning still half-draped in mist. You weren't far. You saw James kneel. He didn't beg. He didn't resist. He simply looked up at the sky, whispered something, maybe a prayer, maybe a name, and lowered his head. And in one clean motion it was done. The first of the 12, gone. The others didn't believe it at first. Peter didn't speak for hours.
John stood by the doorway of the house, unmoving. Thomas clenched his fists. Matthew looked down. It wasn't just grief, it was reality. If James could die, any of them could. But here's the thing. No one ran. The message didn't shrink, it grew. The others didn't hide. They stepped forward. Because if James, the thunder, the witness, the friend, could face the sword with peace, then maybe the rest of them could too. And so the storm rolled on. You walk away from the place where James fell. There's no marker, no shrine, just a flat patch of earth and a sky still trying to decide whether to rain or shine. But deep down, you know, he wouldn't have wanted a monument. He'd just want the message to keep moving. You stay a little longer near the edge of the city. Jude's passing doesn't come with crowds or laments. No one builds a monument. No one marks the spot. But in the silence that follows, you can feel something settle. Like dust on stone. Like memory, choosing where to rest. It's quiet again. And then you hear footsteps. Not the tired shuffle of an old man, but the solid, measured steps of someone who used to walk with purpose, maybe even with a weapon. You turn, and there he is, wrapping a worn cloth around his hands. Simon, the zealot, the one you never really figured out. He never talked about his past much, not in detail, but you knew enough. Simon had been a fighter, a revolutionary, part of a group that believed Rome didn't belong in Jerusalem, and they were willing to shed blood to prove it. He was the kind of man who probably had a list, names of Romans, collaborators, maybe even names of his own people, traitors in his eyes. People like Matthew. That's what makes this part so strange, because you remember the first time Jesus called him, and you remember how no one quite knew what to do with it. A zealot in the same room as a tax collector? That was a disaster waiting to happen. But it didn't. Jesus had a way of taking people who should have hated each other and making them sit down at the same table. And more than that, making them love each other. Simon changed. Not overnight, but slowly. Day by day, word by word. The sword he once sharpened for rebellion grew dull from disuse. Eventually, he put it down altogether. And now, he walks not as a fighter, but as a follower. You travel with him through Egypt, then further, Nubia, maybe Cyrene. There's a rumor he even made it to Britain, where the land is wet and green and the people wrap themselves in fur against the cold. But wherever he goes, the message is the same. This kingdom isn't one with blood. It's one with love. That doesn't mean it's safe. Quite the opposite. The old world doesn't take kindly to men like Simon. Zealots with no sword, revolutionaries who talk about peace, enemies who now call tax collectors their brothers. Eventually, he's taken too. Some say it was in Persia. Others say it was back in Africa. But all the stories agree. They didn't let him die quickly. He was sawn in half, not because of what he'd done, but because of what he refused to stop saying. You're there in the aftermath. You don't look away. You can't. Not because of the violence, but because of the peace on his face. Like someone who had made his peace a long time ago. Simon, who once thought freedom came through fire, found a better way. He died, not in anger, but in purpose. And when it was over, the saw fell silent. But the message, the one he carried in calloused hands and battle-scarred feet, kept moving. You wrap your cloak tighter, the wind is colder now, and still, you keep walking. You walk for a long time after Simon, through valleys where no one knows your name, past olive trees too old to bloom, past memories too quiet to speak. And slowly, you realize something strange. There's only one of them left, John, the youngest when it all began, the quietest maybe, but not the softest. He was the one who leaned against Jesus during supper, who called down fire with his brother, who stayed close when everyone else ran. They called him the disciple Jesus loved, but not because he was perfect, because he remained. And now, he's old. You find him in Ephesus. The sun is low when you arrive, dipping behind white stone homes and scattering long shadows across the street. You see him in the distance, not preaching, not shouting, just sitting on a bench, hands folded, eyes closed, waiting. His hair is white now. His hands shake a little when he lifts his cup. But his eyes? His eyes are clear. You sit beside him, and for a long while, neither of you speaks. Because what do you say to the last one left? He outlived them all. Peter, Andrew, James, Thomas, Philip, Matthew, Bartholomew, Jude, Simon, all gone, martyrs, legends, brothers. And John? John remained. He tells you things slowly, like he's unrolling parchment in his mind. He remembers the details, the smell of the sea, the sound of Jesus' laugh, the way the sun lit the water when he first called them. He talks about Mary, how he cared for her after Jesus died, how the early church leaned on him, how the years slipped past like waves, each one carrying someone away. He wrote letters too, not like Paul, more like poetry, less instruction, more love. Little children, love one another. That's what he'd always say, again and again, until people started to smile and say, "We know, John, we know." And still, he kept saying it, because love never gets old. But not everyone welcomed that message. Rome grew tired of him, tired of his presence, his words, his influence, so they tried to kill him. Some say they threw him into a vat of boiling oil, but he didn't die, so they sent him into exile. Patmos, a rock of an island, bare and harsh. No temple, no synagogue, no crowds, just the sea and the wind and his thoughts. And that's where it happened, the vision. You ask him about it. He smiles faintly and looks out toward the horizon. It was loud, he says, and beautiful, and terrifying. He speaks of trumpets, of scrolls, of a throne and a lamb, of a city with no temple because God himself is the light, and then he falls quiet. You wonder if he misses them, the others. He doesn't answer, but the silence tells you everything. He's tired, but not broken. And when the end comes, it's not with fire, not with steel, but with a sigh, the kind you breathe when the work is finished. John dies in peace, the only one, the last voice of a group that changed the world. A man who watched kingdoms rise and fall, watched his friends die, watched churches grow, and still whispered the same word, love. You leave his grave quietly. There's no fanfare, no thunder, just a gentle breeze through the trees, rustling the leaves like scripture being turned by an unseen hand. The story feels finished, but you know it's not, because it never really was their story to begin with. It was his, and now it's yours. You walk in silence now, not because the road is steep, but because the weight has shifted. The apostles are gone, one by one, their stories trailing behind you like candle smoke in the dark. But there's still one name you haven't spoken, one shadow you haven't faced. Judas. And somehow, even now, the name still stings in your mouth. You don't want to follow him, not really, but his footsteps are there too. Deep ones, left in softer ground than the others, ground soaked with regret. You find the place by accident. A narrow path near Jerusalem, shaded by twisted trees. There's no monument, just rocks, half buried and overgrown, and a silence that feels too still. you sit down anyway, because if we're telling the full story, his is part of it too. You remember him, not just the betrayal. Before that, he was one of the 12, chosen like the others, trusted, sent out to preach, to heal, to drive out demons. He was there when Jesus calmed the sea. He held the broken bread in his hands. He watched the blind see, the dead rise. He called Jesus Rabbi. But somewhere along the way, the ground shifted. No one knows exactly when. Maybe when Jesus started talking about dying. Maybe when the crowds started thinning. Maybe when it became clear that the kingdom he was building didn't come with swords or thrones. Judas wanted something else, so he made a deal. 30 pieces of silver. That's what they paid him. The price of a slave. Just enough to make betrayal feel like business. And then, the kiss. You were there. The garden. The torches. The guards. The moment he stepped forward and pressed his lips to Jesus' cheek. Friend, Jesus said. That word still haunts you. He didn't call him enemy. He called him friend. After that, everything happened fast. Trials, crowds, a cross. And Judas, he vanished. The money burned in his hands. Not literally, but close. He tried to give it back. The priests wouldn't take it, so he threw it on the floor and walked away. Some say he bought a field and hanged himself there. Others say he fell and burst open. Either way, the field still exists. They call it Akeldama, the field of blood. No one builds there. No one sings. You sit for a long time, thinking about how someone could walk so closely to love and still miss it. But even now, even here, the story doesn't end in despair. Because the same Jesus who was betrayed washed Judas's feet. The same Jesus who called him friend still walked to the cross with that betrayal pressing into his skin. And when he rose from the dead, he didn't curse Judas. He just told the others, go tell everyone. Everyone.
Even the ones who failed, even the ones who walked away.
You stand and brush the dust from your hands. The sun is setting now, casting gold over everything, even this place. And for a brief moment you wonder, if Judas had waited just one more day, would grace have found him too? You don't know, but you do know this. Grace is still walking, even here. You leave the field slowly. The sun is almost gone now. The sky bleeding out its final colors, the air cooling just enough to notice. Behind you, the lives of 12 men stretch across mountains, deserts, scrolls, and whispers. Some names faded, some etched in stone. You carry them with you. Peter, bold and broken. Andrew, gentle and steady. James, the thunder that fell first. John, the last light to flicker out. Thomas, the honest doubter turned witness. Philip, the quiet servant. Bartholomew, flayed but faithful. Matthew, the outcast who wrote it all down. Jude, the forgotten one who never wavered. Simon, the rebel turned peacemaker. James the lesser, humble and hidden. And yes, even Judas, the friend who broke. Each one called, each one changed, each one died a death that could have been avoided. All they had to do was stop, keep quiet, deny what they saw, what they knew, what they felt burning in their bones after that upper room and those scarred hands. But they didn't. You think about that a lot now, especially in the stillness. What made them so certain, so willing to trade everything for a name the world wanted buried? And, slowly, the answer comes, like morning light creeping through a shutter. They had seen him. Not just the teacher, not just the man, but the risen one, alive, after the nails, after the tomb, after death had done its worst. He stood before them, ate with them, spoke their names with that same gentleness, like they'd never run away, like their fear hadn't shouted louder than their faith. That's why they gave it all. Not for power, not for fame, but because they knew. And once you've known, once you've seen, what else is there to live for? You look around now. The road stretches ahead, quiet, waiting. No crowd, no miracles on display. Just a steady invitation, the same one they heard so long ago on the edge of Galilee. Follow me. And you wonder, would you? If it meant walking into the unknown, if it meant giving up your comfort, if it meant staying when others left, if it meant dying. You're not sure, but maybe that's okay. Because none of them were sure either. Not at first. They questioned, fumbled, argued over who was greatest, slept when they were supposed to pray, got things wrong, so many things wrong. But they kept walking, and somehow, that was enough. It's night now. The road fades behind you, swallowed by the dark. There's no more to walk today, just soft earth beneath your feet, stars overhead. Quiet company for tired bones and full hearts. You find a place to rest. It's nothing special, just a patch of grass, a crooked tree, the smell of something faint and blooming in the distance. You sit down, let the day fall off your shoulders, and for the first time in a long time, you're still. The 12 are gone. Their voices, their sandals, their laughter echoing through markets, mountains, prisons, temples, all quiet now. Some died alone, some died surrounded by crowds, all of them died holding tight to the same name. But somehow, it doesn't feel like loss. It feels like roots. Because their story didn't stop at their deaths. It grew. Through cities and centuries, through desert whispers and handwritten letters, through churches built and burned and built again. And now, it lives in you. You're part of it, even if you didn't mean to be. Just by listening. Just by sitting here in the dark, heart open and quiet, wondering what it all means. That's how it starts. You don't need to have all the answers. Neither did they. You don't need perfect faith. Peter didn't. You don't need the right words. Moses stuttered. Matthew just started writing. You don't need to be brave every day. Thomas wasn't. Not at first. You just need to follow. One step, one prayer, one yes. And when you fall, you get up. When you're unsure, you lean in. When the road is long, and it will be, you remember that you don't walk it alone, because you never did. You lie back now, eyes tracing constellations you'll never name. Somewhere, a breeze lifts your hair. The world is still spinning, quiet, holy, tired. And you? You're ready to rest. The story will wait for morning. Because even while you sleep, it keeps breathing.